Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another deck profile. Today, I have the pleasure of doing this video with Russell Stelzer, teammate and friend. What's going on, Russ?
Hey, always a pleasure, my guy.
Awesome. All right, so a couple things. We're doing your Jiren deck profile here. A lot of people have been asking to see it. You were very gracious to give me the list so we could do it here on the channel, and I wanted to have you on the video because, you know, who better to talk about it than the guy who built the deck? And I know that you say this deck is very, very slept on. Obviously, there was like one Jiren that topped, I want to say it was a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago at one of the PPG events, but ever since then, you've been saying like it's very, very slept on. You think it can do a lot of things. What is it about this deck? Obviously, we'll go through the main deck as we go through the video, but what is it about this deck that you think like positions it well in this meta?
I've just always been a big fan of Jiren. It's a deck that I've always kind of kept my eye on just because the leader ability is like extremely unique for what it does. And it's one of those leaders where, you know, you can run a lot of generically good cards with it. So depending on the format, it can just kind of sneak its way in. And I think that this format is pretty aggressive, but it's not crazy fast. So Jiren has a really, it's just really well positioned because it can stall out the early turns and make it to like that mid to late game where it thrives because its bombs are just the best bombs in the game. And it did get a boost from the new draft box 6 with some cards that we'll see later on in the video. And I think that all that combined, Jiren is just in a really like good spot right now.
Very cool. So like I said, we did see this top once. I believe it was in set 11. So do you think the same holds true for set 12? Like even moving into that format, this deck seems well positioned?
I think so too. I think we see a lot of the same decks going into next format, and even the new decks coming forth. I think Jiren like matches up pretty well with them. One thing I do like about Jiren is like it doesn't kind of fall prey to some of the same weaknesses that a lot of the normal yellow decks have. You know, most yellow decks just lose to easy removal, hence green. But because of Jiren's unique toolbox, it has access to some bigger bombs to just like get around a lot of stuff green has. So some of the normal bad matchups yellow has, Jiren just kind of like plays around it.
Cool. So yeah, no, I agree with that too. Like I like what Jiren as a leader does because I feel like in modern DBS, at least when you're looking at like meta decks, I feel like your leader has to do something unique, has to do something powerful, and you know, basically negating damage for a turn is definitely up there. So we'll get into the main deck here. So here's our Unison lineup. Pretty unique, I would say. So you're maining 3 copies of Unison of Fury. There are a lot of matchups this card is amazing against, like red Broly, dark Broly, green Gotenks. But I don't know, it's kind of interesting. It's not, I feel like it's not the Unison you generally see in main decks. So are you just maining it as like a meta call because it's good against so many things?
Yeah, I'm just a really big fan of this Unison, this format. I know that the list that topped at I'm pretty sure it was the last PPG Arizona, not the one that just happened, with the one before. I know that he was running the Gogeta Unison because you can pitch all your U9 cards or U11 cards or whatever, and then it fuels your drop area for the 12 drop Jiren. And that package was really good in that format because blue is super prevalent. And blue just has no out to the 12 drop because they can't counterplay it and then they can't negate its attack. So it's just a quad strike coming in.
Right.
It's just free. But in this format, I feel like it's not as good because blue's kind of fallen out of the meta. So the 12 drop doesn't really help you if your best matchup isn't being played. And against the decks that are really good, like Dark Brawly BR and whatnot, the 12 drop's probably just not going to come out. And the Gogeta Unison just doesn't give you enough in those matchups, but Vegeta Unison just shuts those matchups down. And it just feels really good, especially in U11 with cards we'll see later on. This Unison just fits so perfectly with this leader because you have a ton of ways to protect it. So the -3 actually comes up to be pretty relevant as a good like finisher, but that -1 ability is just so strong this format, and just being able to keep decks from attacking like pretty much the entire game is just amazing, because if it lets you get to like 4 energy by the time you awaken, like if you awaken with Jiren at 4 life, at 4 energy, you're gonna win the game, because you're just you're so far ahead that at that point you get like at least 3 extra turns to do whatever you want. And then I run the one Meki Kabura just because it's my favorite unison in the game, and it's just kind of one of those cards. If you draw it, it can put in a lot of work. It's not like super needed. Like you can take this out, you can play 4 Vegeta Unison of Fury if you want. I'm just a really big fan of Meki Kabura because it's one of those cards. Every time I play it, I feel like I just can't lose the game.
Yeah, the defense he offers is absolutely insane. But I have a question. So with playing a 2-drop Unison, besides like space being an issue, why only 2 Prideful Transformation? Because I feel like in yellow decks where like you play a 3-drop Unison or a 4-drop Unison, I understand playing less of the Vegeta because it's not going to be live very early on. But with a 2-drop Unison, I feel like you could play 3 or 4. But is it mostly just like a space thing or what?
Yeah, space is definitely a little tight. And honestly, in like testing, like there's times it's good. But I feel like just because of Jiren's natural survivability, the Vegeta counterplay isn't like amazing. It definitely has its moments, but yeah, space is definitely like the biggest thing. But I don't think it's the best card in the deck.
Gotcha.
So it doesn't really. I feel like 2 is the perfect number.
Gotcha. So moving on, this is what we have for like our mini U11 guys. So a lot of times I'm sure you're playing Casserole off of the leader auto when you swing. You grab Kunchi or you grab your blocker if you need it. I'm sure Kunchi's like the first guy you grab, right? To make sure everything has barrier. And then subsequently you'll grab like Vuyans and stuff. And then Pride of Universe 11 Jiren basically just allows you to revive these guys. So yeah, this would be like the main like low cost defense of the deck, right?
Yeah, Kunchi. So in matchups that have a lot of easy removal, you definitely grab Kunchi first. But if you're playing against other matchups that don't really have good removal, a lot of times I'll go for Buon first, especially in matchups where if Vegeta is good in a matchup and my opponent doesn't have a lot of removal, a lot of times I'll go for Buon first, because then on my turn 2 when I drop Vegeta Unison, it just gives me a blocker to like protect my Unison if they decide to try and go into it next turn with like their leader, or like a lot of people, if you're playing against black decks that have Meki Kabura, a lot of times Meki Kabura is like the only card they can drop under Vegeta to attack with. So a lot of times being able to just have like one blocker up so that they can't kill your Unison that turn is huge.
Gotcha.
And then obviously the Jiren Pride of Universe 11 is easily one of the best cards in the deck. Like just being able to recycle your Vuyans, like bring 2 of those out, a lot of times just gives you extra turns where you don't have to like burn a life for your backside leader ability.
Yeah, 2 blockers for 0 energy is definitely pretty solid. All right, now here's a really cool part about the deck. You're actually maining this Lord Slug engine. So basically you have an Evil Invader, which allows you to play either of these 3 drops for 1 energy. Super Namekian basically locks your opponent out of drawing cards while he's in rest mode, drawing cards or adding cards to deck via non-leader skills. I should be more specific. He also picks the 1 drop out of the deck. And then Angela, I play this in my mecha build as well. Angela is really, really good in like more of those extended games where your opponent's going to tap a lot of their cards to do certain things, and then they basically just lose out on 2 cards on their next turn. So what made you want to throw this engine into this deck? But I feel like it's definitely not going to be a common thing people see.
Yeah, so when I saw this engine, I definitely like instantly thought of Jiren. It's just like this, it's just a solid engine that does so much on its own. Like you're pretty much always going to see either the 1 drop or the 3 drop slug on your turn 1. So you pretty much always have a turn 1 play. And that's another crazy thing about this deck is there's so many turn 1, turn 2 plays that you have that you're always going to be able to do something in the early game, which is what I love. Even though this deck has a really good mid to late game, it has so much you can do in the early turns too. So it's like every level of the game, this deck has something very just impactful that it can play. The 3 drop Lord Slug has just been like overperforming in testing. Just that ability that shuts off your opponent from drawing outside of their leader is like huge. You know, if they play Unison that lets them draw, they just can't draw off of it. You know, if you swing, if it's in rest mode and you go for game, you know, if they're playing draw super combos, they just don't get value out of it. So the 3 drop Lord Slug is definitely like MVP. And a lot of other stuff come up like niche, like the 1 drop being able to tap stuff comes up every now and then. And the 3 drop Angela, just, yeah, if you ever get her ability off or his ability off, it's just ridiculous with this deck because your bombs rely on things being in rest mode. So when your opponent is just forced to keep stuff tapped, it just synergizes really well with what the deck wants to do.
Yeah, no, this engine has been doing incredible for me as well in mecha. So I think going forward this will be like a really good generic yellow engine. Like yellow has always been one of those colors that more or less like just leans into the best generic yellow cards. And yeah, you have Jiren, which like plays some of the Jiren stuff, but you also play generic good yellow cards. And I think this will actually very, very, very quickly become one of the new generic yellow good stuff engines in set 12.
100%.
Sure.
And the engine was like less than $20, so it's like it's just extreme value.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, moving on to some more of our beef. You're playing 3 Sand Instincts, pretty common for almost any deck, really. And you're playing 4 Raiders Warcry. So before we get into the big boy Jiren, a lot of yellow lists are starting to trim down on this guy. Do you think 4 is just the right number for this deck, or what?
Yeah, I think with Jiren, you should, like, 4 is just always the right number. Things like Warcry and Instinct, the great thing about Jiren is you can like tap out offensively for Warcry, or just like tap all your energy for 1 to 2 instincts and not really worry about dying in most matchups. So just always having access to Warcry is really good in this deck because it just gives you a lot of like extra offensive power in the early turns. So that's another reason why I just really like Jiren, is I think it's the best deck that runs Raiders Warcry. So like there's really no reason to run less than 4 of it in your deck if you're playing Jiren.
Gotcha. So, all right. So when we got to this point, I was going to ask about the 12 drop, but you pretty much already explained why you're not playing it in this build, because blue is not super popular right now. So you're playing the 10 drop. So do you find it easy enough to have like 5 U11s on the board to make this guy a 5 drop?
Oh yeah, like a lot of times by the time you charge your 5th energy, you've already played like 2 Casa rolls or whatnot, and you can always like just play a Jiren or the activate main Jiren from hand to like grab something else out. So it should never really be a problem to have 5 out on board. And this guy is just like, he's broken. Like, he just does so much. He literally, like, going into next format, another reason why I think this deck is going to be really good is Sin Shenron got a ton of support in set 12. It was already a top tier deck, and it's just going to get better. And 10 drop Jiren literally says if you tap 6 for Sin Shenron's backside ability, you lose the game.
You lose all your energy. Yeah, it's kind of nuts.
You're just gonna lose all your energy, and they can't, like, they can tap 6, but they're probably not gonna kill you that turn anyways because of your leader's backside ability. So they're gonna tap 6, not kill you, and then you're just gonna blow up all their energy. And he just synergizes really well with the Vegeta Unison, because in testing, actually, I was in AZ this last weekend, and this is the list I would have run if I played, but I decided to commentate instead. But in testing against Dark Brawly, I would open up with the Vegeta Unison, play it, keep them from attacking for a few turns, and in some matchups, like if it went that late, I'd play Jiren, and like most of the time I wasn't blowing up all their energy. Sometimes I was, but I'd blow up like 3 to 4 energy on average with them, and then that takes them from like 5 all the way back down to 1 or 2 energy, and then you can just keep ticking down Vegeta, and they just never get to attack with any of their Dark Brawlies the whole game. So he just has unique stuff like that. Like, he doesn't always have, a lot of times you play him, he just ends the game. But in a lot of matchups, just that energy destruction pairs really nice with the Vegeta Unison to just like, keep extending the game.
Gotcha. So at that point, if you set up that lock, you can basically extend the game for as long as you need or want to, which is definitely a really strong controlling aspect of this deck as well. I think this is, very much like a mid-range, but probably pivots a bit more toward control. But I even see a lot of ways in this deck you can pivot to aggro. So it seems like this deck is very much a coverall in that sense. So this is our super combo lineup here. We're playing 2 Sacred Disbelief and 2 copies of Krillin. Man, this artwork really disturbs me. This is so weird. But anyways, the 2 Zamasus and the 3 Bergamo Ferocious Roar. Just looking back through the deck, is Zamasu the only way to trigger this Bergamo?
No, there's a few different ways. Like, we have, obviously, yeah, you said a super combo. We have the Meki Kabura.
Right.
We have Raiders Warcry. You'll see later on we run Poutine also. Also, there's like the 1-drop Slug that lets me tap something. So there's quite a bit of ways to trigger him. Bergamo's just like easily one of the MVPs of the deck. A lot of times when I have 4 energy, when I charge my 4th energy, a lot of times I'll just pass back to my opponent. and a lot of times whatever they do, I'll tap something and then play out like 2 Bergamos, either tap down their energy or any like battle cards that are threatening to me. They pass back to me, you drop a Jiren, and you just win at that point because they just lost too many resources.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess I brain farted on ways to activate Bergamo in this deck. But anyways, yeah. So the one Poutine, this is actually kind of interesting because in my mecha list, I've been like back and forth on like 1 or 2 copies because like you can only really play one, because when you play one in the game, it's generally going to stick around the rest of the game, and then like you draw another one, it's kind of dead. But you want to also see the cards, so, like you play 2 copies, right? So where did you come to the conclusion of 1 copy?
So I'm a really big fan of this card. Like I've been playing yellow for a while now solely because of this card. Like in decks like Sin Shenron, I think you need to run 2. But in decks like this, it's obviously really good, but it's not super needed just because you have so much survivability with your leader ability. It's obviously synergizes really well with the whole deck. But one thing about Jiren is like space is super tight, and you'll notice when you play games with this deck, every card you draw is like super impactful. Like you always want every card in your hand. And the hardest thing about this deck is like charging, because every charge honestly feels like terrible because everything you play down, you wish you just had in your hand. So you really want to minimize the amount of off-colored cards that you have. You don't really want them to clog, because if you open up too many black cards, then you might just be forced to charge a yellow card that you absolutely don't want to charge. And so 1 just felt right. I like the 1 max power. I run at least 1 max power in almost all my decks, just because the card just does a lot for 1 energy. And then yeah, the 1 Poutine, like you said too, especially you don't really want more than 1. If you play the first one, you just never want to see another one.
Right.
So in this deck, I think 2 black cards is like the perfect amount. You really don't want to be drawn into a bunch of different black cards. So in testing, it's just been the perfect ratio.
Gotcha. And then just wrapping up, we have the 2 Nimbus. You know, yellow negates are so weird nowadays. Like you have Time Magic, you have Release from Evil, you have this, but like they're all so specific in what they do that you kind of have to pick the right one for the format. And Nimbus seems pretty good because we are going into a format with a lot of good aggressive decks. And then Selzino in this deck, it's just so funny because like your top end is already a 10 drop, so like you just play a 10 drop, swing out, and then if that doesn't kill them, then you just very easily go into Selzino. So that's pretty funny. But anyways, that's the whole deck, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Russ, as we do with everyone that does deck profile on the channel, anything you want to say wrapping up? Any shout outs you want to throw out there?
Yeah, shout out obviously to you and the whole team. Shout out to Andy. Andy tends to like a lot of the decks that I like, so we talk a lot about all this stuff. Shout out to the guy that taught from AZ at one of the last PPGs, because he's the one that kind of like inspired me to start playing Jiren again. And then once new draft box cards came out, I was just like, this deck is ridiculous right now. So definitely don't sleep on Jiren. This deck has a lot of very, very good matchups, and if you just keep playing with the deck, you'll see how strong this deck is in this current format, going into right now in set 11 and going into set 12.
Very cool, man. Thank you for your time. We'll see you next time.